I am now. I don't know how that happened. When the booth gave it to me, it was on, so that was my fault somehow. You know, I wasn't really in the mood to do church this morning. I just woke up, it was gloomy outside, I just want to go back to bed. Then I got here, and I'm happy to be in the house of the Lord now. Saw your smiling faces, heard the music, and I've heard some wonderful answers to prayer this morning, so I'm in a good mood now, and I'm ready to preach. Okay, so my usual preface, we're doing a political series, but again, here's what I do. I take a passage from the Bible, I talk about what the Bible says, I talk about what that means for life, and then I apply it to politics, right? I don't go on a 40-minute rant about whatever. So we're coming from the Bible, and we're going to see what it says. There's a philosopher during the Enlightenment who coined this term called the noble savage. Noble savage. Cool phrase, right? So here's what a noble savage was. If you could leave civilization and just find a human in their natural state, no institutions, no civilization, just as they were intended by nature and by God, what you would find is a noble savage. You find somebody who's peaceful, somebody who's cooperative, and somebody who's basically a good person before they're corrupted by institutions. And this caught on quite a bit, and this idea spread in philosophy. And then a couple world wars happened. And people became a little more pessimistic about human nature. And so this one guy wrote a book called Lord of the Flies. Everybody read that book? Ralph Scott the Conch, right? And what happens is these really proper, well-trained English boys who have really good manners end up on an island deserted by themselves, and they end up dividing into tribes and killing each other with spears and stuff. And when a ship comes and they find them, they couldn't even recognize them as English boys because they had just turned so savage without the noble. And so you have these different perspectives on human nature. Is man noble savage, or is he just going to degenerate into war? When you read the Bible, of course the truth's somewhere in the middle, but I kind of lean on the war side. And you read the Bible and you see that things are warlike in the world. I mean, actually, even before humans show up, there's chaos in the world. Right? Because you think, well, Adam and Eve, they're in the garden. Before they ascend, there's this snake. And before they ascend, there's the snake trying to convince them to disobey God. So there's a part of creation before Adam and Eve exist that's already resisting God. There's already some chaos in the creation. And then you go before that, and it talks about the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And when you go through waters in the Bible, the waters is always an image of chaos and destruction. That's why the sea will be no more in the book of Revelation. That's why monsters like Leviathan. You know how you say Leviathan in Japanese? Gojira. So that's when Leviathan comes out of the water, right? And just causes chaos and mayhem. I speak several languages. And so you see in the Bible, there's this image of chaos from the beginning. There's the snake resisting God. And then right after that, you have Adam and Eve, and they're made good. They're not made perfect. If they were made perfect, they wouldn't mess things up. But everything God made was good. And life was starting to flourish. Things were going well. Then you put Adam and Eve in the garden. It's awesome. They're naked, eating fruit, just hanging out. Life couldn't be better. And then, very soon, they start fighting. After they eat from the fruit, from the tree, God talks to Adam and he says, "Who did this?" He goes, "I don't want to throw her under the bus, but it was totally her." So God looks at her, "What have you done?" She goes, "It was a snake." And he turns the snake and he goes, "I'm not going to let you talk." He's like, "You're just going to eat dirt forever. I'm sick of excuses." And then he just spanked everybody. He kicked them out. That's a summary. So you see, from the very first two humans, they're already fighting with each other. The peace that God established in the garden is gone. And then they have kids, and two of the kids, one's named Cain, one's named Abel. Do you guys know how this plays out? The very first set of kids, they start bickering and their sibling rivalry, and it's an incredibly deep passage. But basically, Cain ends up tricking Abel to go out in the field so he can kill him. And the way he kills him is he bashes his head in with a rock. So it's a very personal murder. And that's that very next that's the first generation still. That's the children of Adam and Eve. And you keep going on. And at some point, God decides to go to war with humans. Who do you think won that one? Yeah, God comes out on top. But he says, every inclination of the human heart is always evil all the time from birth, even when they start. So let's just drown everybody. He takes a couple people, puts them in a boat, everybody dies, and they land on the ground. Then they come out of the boat. That's how evil and wicked, warlike humans were. They come out of the boat, and what's one of the first things that happen? Noah gets wrecked. He gets poop-faced, right? He drinks a lot of alcohol, and he's absolutely drunk. And then his kids dishonor him. He wakes up from his drunken, well, one kid in particular. He wakes up from his drunken stupor, and he curses one of his own children. He curses harm onto his child. So right when they get out of the boat, after everything's washed clean in a sense, they get out of the boat, and humans are still fighting. And that's the first 9 chapters of the Bible. Genesis has 50 chapters. You go Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, and you go all the way through the Old Testament, and it just continues with war. You see nations war. You see kings killing each other. You see spouses fighting and families being broken apart. You see brothers going to war against each other. Now, there's beautiful things in humans too, but we are a warlike animal. Like, we are warlike creatures. And you know, the Bible is such a complicated book when it reports all this stuff because it's such an honest book. And somebody goes to tell me, well, why would it talk about war in the Bible? It's like, have you seen this place? Like, if the Bible never talked about war, never talked about grief, never talked about pain, never talked about confusion, never talked about struggle, adversity, or death, do you think it'd be as powerful a book as it is? No way. If it was just a book of positive thoughts. And we know humans are warlike because you read history and you have wars from beginning to end. We look around now. Are there wars today? Are you worried about them? Yeah, so on the global scale, there's wars happening. And you know what? I can just look at my house. You know, you can go from big to small and everything in between. So in my house, sometimes there's war because my children don't recognize my constant brilliance. And so sometimes they bring death and destruction into the world. It's not my fault, you know. But pray for them, if you would. Yeah, pray for them. But in families, there's strife. And isn't that one of the most terrible things? I know children who don't like their parents. And I got to tell you, the one person in the universe who's 1,000% on board to being connected to you and close to you is your child. And somehow that gets messed up sometimes. And then we pledge our life to one other person. We say, yep, for better or worse, it doesn't matter. I'm with you till the end of time. And then at some point, some people say, never mind. Nah. Right? But you made that vow, and that should be a thing too. But war happens. Peace gets stolen. The peace in the sense of the garden where everything was flourishing and growing and things were going well, that's what peace is. You know what peace is? You ever have a moment where things just feel perfect? You're like, this is what life should be. That's peace. Or you feel really strong because you're doing something you're enjoying a lot, and you feel like your life has purpose in this moment. That's peace. But man, that's not with us all the time, is it? Sometimes there's war instead. So in the house, globally, does our city, does Spokane, Meade, Colbert, I guess we'll include Riverside. Does this area have peace? Or do we have problems? We got problems. Any of you who are in helping professions, you know we got problems. I mean, it's so bad. Remember when educators could just educate? But now the world's so broken, we also want educators to be social workers and people who can heal the fabric of society when they have contact with kids. And the reason we're asking a lot of so many people is because there's so much brokenness and there's so much peace missing from our city. And God bless you all who do that. Churches have war, don't they? Isn't that the stupidest thing? But churches have war. Sometimes it's important. Sometimes you're determining if the economic trinity has important relevance to your soteriology, and you got to work that out because it's crucial, right? But sometimes it's something dumb, like the color of a carpet or the style of music. You know, I know a lot of churches who said, we're going to plant a church because this church doesn't care about anybody because they only play old music. They don't want to reach anybody. Then they start the new church, they play contemporary music, and nobody comes. It's weird. We get these self-righteous wars, and we get stuck and obsessed on things, and then we just battle in the church. And we should be the most gracious, patient, forgiving people who's most aware of our own faults and therefore most generous with the faults of other people. Because we're supposed to be so obsessed with becoming holy and fixing ourselves, we don't really have time to try and fix everybody else. In theory. But man, churches split, churches break, people stop coming to church because something happened, something did, people feel neglected. I mean, churches have war in them too. Families have war in them. There's war all over the place. And when Jesus came into the world in the flesh, there was literal war, and there was all these other kind of wars we're talking about. You know, he lived in this place called Palestine, and in Jesus' day, Palestine was occupied by the Roman Empire. And you know, Palestine is this little land bridge that goes from Europe, well, where do you guys? So here's the land bridge, here's Africa, land bridge, Asia, Europe, right? The one little land bridge, that's Palestine. And so in a world with no planes, trains, or automobiles, guess what people fought over for thousands of years? That little land bridge. All the trade went through there that went by land, and it was really important. So you had the Egyptian power in the south, and up north you had some random power. You know, maybe it was the Babylonians, maybe it was the Persians, maybe it was the Assyrians. It ended up being the Roman Empire, and they would just fight over that. So imagine you're a tiny, tiny nation with not a lot of military political power. You've had freedom once or twice, but you're actually occupied by the Roman Empire. And see, the Roman Empire was no joke. What do you think the concept of human rights was like in the time of Jesus? In the ancient Middle East? Yeah, not so developed. Christianity did a lot of that. Okay, the idea that everybody has a right just because they're created in the image of God. It doesn't matter their race, their gender, their background. Those are ideas that germinated from Christian thinking, which the pagan Romans didn't have. So what was their idea? Well, if you make me mad, well, let's take the idea of Jesus getting crucified, right? Pontius Pilate, this all makes total sense. Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent, right? So Pilate's the governor who was ruling over Palestine at the time. The religious leaders bring Jesus under trial to him, and he says, this isn't my problem, go take him to Herod. He just tries to slough it off. So they take him to another ruler. That ruler says, hey, dance for me, Jesus. Tell me a joke, funny man. He tries to get him to do a miracle. And Jesus just stands there and he goes, this guy's boring, get him out of here. Send him back to Pilate. He says his problem. So he goes back to Pilate, and Pilate's like, what are we doing here? There's a huge festival in town. There's way more people in town than normal. I got to deal with a super mad population because they're being oppressed and dominated by us, and you're bringing me this problem. And you know what he decides? Look, I know this guy's innocent. I know he's just a pawn in your power play, but you know what? I'll kill him because it's easier. It's just simpler that way. Does that sound like somebody who's overly concerned with human rights? He says, I know you're innocent, but I'll kill you anyway. And I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to kill you in the most public, torturous way that we've ever devised in the history of mankind. We're going to strip all the skin off of your back with whips. We might punch you in the face a little when you're in custody and put a crown of thorns on you. We'll put a robe on you, and right when the blood from your back starts to clot, we're going to rip it back off because it's funny. Then we'll make you carry the crossbar up. We'll nail you to it. We'll put you up there naked with other criminals, and we'll just hang you there until you die. I know you're innocent, but this is just easier this way. It's just easier. So you can imagine the oppression and the war that Palestine was experiencing under the Roman Empire, because we see it played out in the life of Jesus. And then when Jesus came to the community, there was all kinds of factions that were warring. There were Herodians, Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots. There were all kinds of different groups that were just fighting and trying to get political power and trying to get influence. And so I know you guys don't know about this, but in his society there was some political division going on. And people who had different ideas about how politics should play out. And they were willing to go to war over it. We don't understand that, but because we're a society of harmony and peace. But just use your imagination. And then Jesus also had conflict with his family. They came once to take him home because they thought he had gone insane. And the conflict got so intense, he said, well, who's my real family? It's everyone who does the will of my Father. Now, we know his family came around later, but there was some more there. There was some missing piece there. And then in this passage, Jesus preaches peace. He gives us this version of the world that is much different than the world we see and the world the Bible reports on. It's not a warlike world, it's a world of peace. And here's what Jesus says. He says, God blesses. What does bless mean? It means it makes you happy. Not happy in that I'm in a good mood in that way, but you know that deep, settled, indestructible happiness that you've dreamed about? That's what he's talking about. So when you're blessed, you're happy. So God makes happy those who are poor. Does that sound like the way of the world? Come on now, talk to me. Does that sound like the way of the world? I get 4 of you. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. God blesses those who mourn. You'll be happy if you're sad. You know, my mom died about 2.5 years ago. And I talked to my brother this week. And we were thinking about it and we got sad about it. You probably missed somebody you love too. And I didn't feel how happy in that situation. I didn't feel blessed. But that's what this is saying. You'll be blessed if you mourn. This is so different than our intuitions. God will make happy, blesses those who mourn, for they will be comforted. God blesses those who are humble, for they will inherit the earth. Humble. Is your goal to be the least powerful person in the room in every room you enter? Well, if you do that, you'll be happy. Who agrees? Yeah, that's what I thought. God blesses those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they will be satisfied. You know, when I hunger and thirst for justice, I'm not satisfied, I'm frustrated. Have you seen this place? But it says I'll be happy. God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I only like mercy when it applies to me. Okay, here's the least satisfying movie in the world. Let's live in an alternate world. Okay, let's take that Bible story we review here often, right? It's an illustration of the character of God. The first John Wick movie. So here's what happens. They kill John Wick's puppy. It's his puppy, and it's a gift from his dead wife. No spoilers yet because this is in the trailer. It's a gift from his dead wife because she wants him to continue loving something, so she gives him a puppy, and they kill the puppy. So what does justice require? It requires John Wick to wipe out the whole Russian mafia, right? Headshot after headshot after headshot, all of them. It requires him to do that. And that's what he does right until the end of the movie. And he goes to the guy who killed his dog, and imagine at that point he says, I forgive you. Go into the world and have peace. And then credits rolled. You know how unsatisfying that would be? Why is that unsatisfying? Because I don't long for mercy. I want justice. So I like it when the guy's halfway through a sentence and John Wick interrupts him, and I won't spoil it. But we long for justice. We long for it so bad, we'll fantasize about it. Somebody says something mean to us in the grocery store in line, and for the next 3 hours, we're just dreaming about the ways that God could destroy that person. The car wreck they could get in, right? The way a Russian mafia could show up at their house and kill their puppy, you know? We're imagining all kinds of things. We love justice, and he's saying, no, the way to happiness is if you're merciful. And then he says, blessed are those whose hearts are pure, for they will see God. Blessed are those who work for peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. God blesses those who are persecuted for doing right, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, some of you feel persecuted sometimes, but there's more intense persecution going on this morning for Christians around the world. Like right now, Christians are being attacked, beaten, jailed, and murdered because they're Christian. That's so far from our experience, right? We think, oh, they're going after somebody who wouldn't make a cake for a gay wedding. We're persecuted. And yeah, that's a form of persecution, but there are also persecutions that are much more intense, where people have shed blood to stay faithful to the gospel. And he's saying those people are happy. Now, in my mind, I don't picture them as happy. I think they're getting ripped off. I think there's a terrible injustice going on, and it makes me angry. So what's Jesus talking about? Because he doesn't stop there. He says, God blesses you and makes you happy when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you're my followers. Have you ever had people just try and cancel you or attack your reputation and say all kinds of things about you that weren't true? Were you happy about that? It's like this social lynching, right? It felt terrible. He says, be happy about it. Be very glad. He says it again. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember, the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. So what's Jesus on about here? Because we look at a world that's filled with war. And we see Jesus preaching this counterintuitive, honestly, on the face of it, nonsense gospel. That actually the way to overcome war isn't by being better at war, it's by being a person of peace. It's not by acquiring more power and dominating and being more warlike. It's about being humble. It's about being merciful. If you need to, it's about being humble enough to go to a cross and being merciful to the people who sent you there. Maybe even praying for some of them while you're dying on the cross as they gamble for your clothes. It couldn't be more opposite. You know, I grew up in a pretty violent environment. And so I had a very combative attitude. Well, I don't know why I say had. I still have a very combative, but I'm working on it, right? Okay? But I was much more combative when I was younger and into a lot of my Christian life. And so our response if somebody got in our space was just to punch them in the face. Because you had a status to protect, right? And you didn't have a lot of anything besides status, so you had to protect your status. So if somebody stepped to you, you had to put them in check, and you had to make sure everybody knew what was going on. That is the way of the world, and it's ingrained into us. And sometimes Christians participate in that. Sometimes we think, even though Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world, that we can somehow bring about the kingdom of God in other ways. Sometimes we think that it's not enough to disagree with the other side. We also need to hate them and to mock them and to go to war with them. You know, I wrote down a list I was going to read, but I decided not to. A list of, remember last week we did the news thing? Well, I went on social media and I got things from Christians. I made sure they were Christian accounts, what they said about the other side. And I got some from mostly mainline Christians, what they said about conservatives, and I got some about mostly evangelical Christians, what they said about liberals. Let me just ask you, do you think the list was words of peace or words of war? So I'll just share a couple, because I brought it up. Some people on the left said that Donald Trump is a fascist and anybody who votes for him is a racist and they just want tyranny. Are those words of peace or words of war? Is it rational to think that everybody who wants to vote for Donald Trump is a racist? No, especially since lots of them are people of color, right? It's complicated, but it's a sweeping statement. But what does the statement do? What psychological work does the statement do? Well, it says, these people are of low character, they're terrible, so nobody should believe them, nobody has to listen to them, and we're right and they're wrong. That's the work it does, right? It's not an argument about policy. You just slap them with a label. And there's a lot more labels I'm not going to talk about. Okay, let's just do one from the other side. There's this terrible, terrible term that I saw a Christian on the right saying about Christians, or not Christians, but liberals. And it's, I'm not going to say it, but it's basically a word that says all liberals are incredibly, incredibly stupid. Do you guys know the word I'm going for? Some of you do. Some of you are bad. You should know that word. Sinner. And so the word I'm going for, they just said they're incredibly, incredibly, incredibly stupid. The way they talk about Kamala Harris is she's incredibly stupid. Look at her, the cackle. And they just say all these things about her, right? Now, I'm going to say that's not reasonable to say. The worst thing you could say is that she's incompetent, if you want to say that. Okay, if I had to rebuild an engine and an engine's in front of me, would I appear intelligent or stupid? You can say, I would look stupid. I would not know what to do, rebuild an engine. You know, I'm not very mechanical. I can do brakes, and that's where my expertise ends. That's about it. So I'd take a hammer to it, try and open it up. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd look like a total moron. But if we get in a conversation about the interpretation of the term theopneustos and how that goes back to Genesis 1 from the pastoral letters, I would sound brilliant, right? Because I read books about it. So, yeah, let's break down the Greek. I'll parse it out. I'll tell you about the culture at the time in the ancient Near East, which we now call ancient Southwest Asia, and we'll talk about what this word meant in its original context. Put me in front of an engine, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So you could say she's incompetent at this job for which she's being put forth to do, right? But do you really think somebody who has basically zero intelligence could ascend for years and years through the political system to this level? If you do, you're being irrational. It takes social acumen and intelligence to get to that high of a level, especially in a game as mean as politics. It just does. Now, I'm not telling you she's smart and competent to do the job, but what I'm saying is if you call her and everybody who votes for her and insults her intelligence and says they're basically cavemen and stupid because of that, that's just a way to apply a derogatory term to this whole group of people as well. You guys with me? Don't have to agree, but you see how the terms work, right? And I see Christians using these terms on both sides, and they're just going to war. And it makes me wonder which gospel they're following. It makes me wonder which God they're worshiping. Like, Jesus was very clear about the way to live in this passage. But some of us just don't believe it. And I know we don't believe it because they're trying to accomplish the kingdom of God through other means by going to war with other people. Now, I'll grant you, war is necessary sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes it's necessary. If people invade my home and they're going to take my stuff and hurt my family, right? That's philosophically, we call it just war theory. They're going to die. Okay, there's a time and place for that. And Revelation, Jesus comes back, and it's not with a big old handshake either. But we're buying into this false gospel that the way to win the world to Jesus and to see holiness and peace in the world is by becoming more dominant and winning wars. What would happen if Christians just disappeared from the earth? What would happen if there were no Christians working for peace anymore? Well, we actually kind of know what happens to societies that lose Christianity because some societies have already done it. So historically, we can just look at what happens to the morality and the life in those countries, and we can see what happens. In fact, let's look at our own country, because we're on our way. At one point, this country was 60% Protestant and 15% Catholic, which meant, 20% Catholic, which meant we were about 80% Christian. Okay, now we're about 25% evangelical and 22% Catholic. So we're much less Christian than we used to be. And the people who subscribe to no religion at all used to be about 2 or 3%. Now it's about 22%. So we're moving into a post-Christian nation. We're not a Christian country anymore. You guys see that? Do you feel like the government and the society always acts in ways that glorify Christ? Or are we acting in ways that increasingly disregard Jesus? And what is that doing to our country? What is it doing to the morality of our country? The farther we drift from Jesus, the farther we drift from God, the farther we drift from the morality that's in this passage, the more warlike we become. By the way, this happens in relationships. This happens in marriages. Some of you are going to war with your spouse now, or at least there's a lack of peace, and you're just trying to win, right? It's tough, man, because you get with a person and you're so happy and everything's going great. Then you say you're going to do this forever, and it seems like it's going to be amazing, and then it turns out they're a butthead, right? You're like, man, this isn't what I signed up for, and you feel like the game has changed on you. And so it's complicated, and the other person typically feels the same way, and so you're both trying to get the other person to perform to a level they performed at before, and it's just a struggle. And sometimes you both give up, sometimes you both keep fighting, but it's difficult. And this is, by the way, why the key to every happy relationship is not communication. The world says that. Why? Because, well, my sermon is long enough. But it's not communication. And I'll tell you why. When I do marriage counseling, I can teach people the most brilliant, perfect, psychologically evidence-based communication practices that's ever existed in the existence of everything that's ever existed. And they almost never use it. They might use it for about the first 30 seconds of the fight. After that, it's gone. After that, it's just like every other fight they've ever had. Why? Because sometimes you want the war. Because sometimes you want the war you know instead of the peace you don't. And so a lot of people are just, they'd rather have war. Why? Because we're warlike creatures. And sometimes you just want to fight. I have a funny story about that, but I'm not going to tell it. Yeah, too bad. So the key to relationships healing, it's not going to be communication. Communication is good, but that's not the fix-all, because usually what communication becomes is a new tool in the toolbox to where if you do it right, the other person will finally do what you want them to do. So what it becomes is a more sophisticated way to go to war. You just have better weapons now, and then you abandon the old ways anyway, and you go back to the old tribal warfare you had before. By the way, what really does it is a bedrock of commitment, acceptance, and a lot of forgiveness. That's what brings peace back. Some of you are noobs at this. I've been married 24 years, but the fights you have the first year are the same fights you will have the 24th year. The same annoying habits they have are the same annoying habits they're always going to have, by and large. And one more thing on this bonus sermon I'm preaching now. It is the crux of your marriage that you are now responsible for another person, and that is annoying. That's a big part of the purpose of this relationship, because what it does is it teaches you to live outside of yourself a little bit more, because now you got to worry about somebody else. And then you have kids, and then you're living outside of yourself more, because now you got to worry about other people. And the process of marriage isn't to make you happy, it's to make you holy and more like Jesus, because the more you learn to live outside of yourself, the more you realize you don't have to fight and claw for everything and live a self-absorbed life, and the more you can be a blessing to other people, and the more you can find your purpose in God because you're less self-referential. So when you get there, The whole purpose of marriage is to make you holy and to bring you outside of yourself. And that only happens through a million fights about a million stupid things that annoy you. That's the only way you find peace, is through all those little wars. And when you get there, and there's a day when you look at your spouse and you say, you know what? This is so annoying about you. 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 And I love you so much. And I wouldn't want it any other way. And I'm glad those things are annoying. And I want you in my life. And I know those things that are annoying about me. I'm just glad we're together. And you teach me about God. That's where you want to get to. And some of you are still in the tug-of-war stage. And some of you want the war. But the way to get peace in your marriage isn't to get better at war. Some of you think that, and some of you are very dominant over your spouse. You haven't won. You have not won. And some of you are really verbally intelligent, so you're better at arguing in the moment than your spouse, so you can always crush them in an argument. Just because you win doesn't mean you're right. It just means God blessed you with a better general score in IQ. It doesn't make you smarter or right, though. And there's not a lot of wisdom in winning every fight. You know that, right? It's not a lot of wisdom in winning every fight. So, bonus sermon, there you go. If you liked it, the offering boxes are in back. I'm just kidding. So Jesus is preaching a way of peace that is the opposite of the way of war that we seem to be inclined towards, and the way of war that we see in the world. And we know what America's looking like as it becomes less and less Christian. Is this the moral direction you want to go with our country? The one we're headed in? It's not for me. Is it for you? Do you want to keep going where we're going morally as a country? Who do we have to blame for the moral decline in America? Let's read this passage and see. You are the salt of the earth, but what good is it if salt has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. We blame all kinds of things for the moral degeneration of the United States. We blame the liberals. We blame the conservatives, right? We blame whatever political party. We blame this politician or that politician. We blame this policy or that policy. We blame this people group or that people group. We never blame ourselves. But church, I guarantee you, if we were living peace-filled, sacrificial, God-glorifying lives filled with love and compassion, you couldn't keep people away from Jesus if you beat them with a stick. The people group we have to blame for the godlessness in the United States is the church. Because we gave away too much of our testimony. Now, I'm not saying the church doesn't have any testimony, because a lot of you guys are lights for Jesus in your lives, and you lead people to Christ, and great things are happening at this church and other churches. I'm saying by and large, though, the reason the United States is less Christian is because Christians weren't being Christians. Because we lost our saltiness. We lost the flavor we gave to the world. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine for all to see, so that everyone will praise your Father in heaven. How do you live a life of peace? I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you already know. But I'm going to teach you a little technique just in case you need one, okay? Most of you, right when you see something, you go, all right, let's do this. It's on. Bring it. I just want you to pause for a second. Okay, take a breather before you ring the bell and start the first round. Don't be automated. Don't live automatically. Just stop. If you have to say stop, do the rubber band thing. Slap yourself. I don't know. Light your shoe on fire. Do something just to disrupt what you normally do. Just stop for a second. And I want you to look at whatever post you're seeing, whatever human you're seeing, right? Whatever news article you're seeing, whatever is starting to make you go to war. I want you to stop and I want you to think, how can I bring blessing and happiness and peace into this? How do I make peace here? So, for example, some of you are totally lost with your kids. Maybe it's your fault, maybe it's your not. I don't know. But some of you are totally lost with your kids. Some of your kids have gone far from God. Some of them are just a little bit from God. Some of them just have problems they're dealing with. And it just disrupts the whole family because you had this vision for how your life was going to go, how your kids were going to turn out, and now it's shot, right? So they had this idea for how things were going to play out. And you're like, oh, my kids are so dumb. They're so stupid. Why don't they tie both their shoes before they leave the house? You just, whatever it is. So a lot of times you'll go to war with the kid. Maybe yell at him, right? Well, I don't have to illustrate it. You know what war looks like in your house. You might go to war with the kid. Think, okay, how do I make this more like the Garden of Eden, more flourishing? How do I make this a place where this human can flourish? How do I bring peace to this? Some of you will be fighting with your spouse or just frustrated with your spouse. And you can look at him and see him as a human being again instead of just a frustrating obstacle. And you can say, okay, how do I add peace to this situation? How do I make peace here? By the way, if you're a woman looking for a man or a man looking for a woman, don't look for somebody that makes you happy. Because they all make you happy for the first few months. Don't look for someone who makes you happy. Look for someone who brings peace. Someone who brings peace. And if you need somebody who brings war, that means you're crazy, and you should probably get less crazy before you get married. Okay, one more quick bonus sermon. I was reading this book about sexual abuse, and they found that statistically, I don't remember the exact statistics, but there's emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And there's a certain percent where the sexually addicted, that they have those percentages in each category. Okay? Got it? So, it's very high when it came to physical abuse. Let's say it was 60%. And let's say it was like 15% for sexual abuse. I'll look up the stats so I can do something later. So those three different categories, what they found are their spouses as a population had the same statistics in each category. Exact same in three different categories. What's one thing that might mean? Well, what it means is that we all tend to sync up with the same level of crazy we got. It might look different, but that's what we do. And so if you think your spouse is crazy, guess what? As crazy as you think they are, that's right. And what we do is there's special kinds of crazy that our special kinds of crazy syncs up with, but they tend to be the same levels of crazy, even if they're flavored differently. So you're both whacked out. So seriously, if you want war a lot and you need the if you need the poison, and if you need the drama, you might need to grow in Christ a little bit first, because you want to attract the kind of person where there's peace and not war. So sometimes it's better to be single for a while so you can get your stuff together and become the kind of person you want to be with. You know what I'm saying? So if you're looking for somebody and you want a man, you want a woman, whatever it is, don't look for someone who makes you happy. Look for someone who will add peace and bring peace, because it's not the same thing. And if you're already married, you want to be your spouse's peace. And church, what do we got, like a week and a half before the election? This world is going to need a lot of peace over the next week and a half. Probably the week or two or year, decade or two or century or two after that. They can't go anywhere to get it if they can't come to the church for it. If people who have faith in God can't have peace, nobody else in the world is going to have anything to offer them. All they're going to offer them is, come on in, the water's fine here. The way we bond in this social group is we hate that group and we go to war with them. So come on in. And people will get recruited to various levels of hate and various hate groups, and they'll go to war. And that's where their impulse that God has placed in them to worship God, it'll go to war instead. And it'll go to politics instead, and it'll go to other things instead. And it won't make them blessed because they won't love mercy. They won't love peace. So look at your life this week and just ask, how can I be a peacemaker in every level? And I'm serious. You might want to list all the important people in your life and just evaluate yourself. Am I being a peacemaker in this, in this, in this, in this, in this? List the things that are important to you. Politics, right? Trump, Kamala, Trump, Kamala, whatever. The news, this, that. Just list the things you spend your headspace on and think, okay, is this bringing me peace? Is this making me more like Jesus? Or is this making me go to war? You might need to do some surgery on yourself. So make an actual list this week and think through the aspects of your life, the people that are important to you, and the things you spend your time on. Think, is this a peacemaking thing or is this a war-making thing? The world desperately needs the church to be peacemakers today. Because the only power in the whole universe that can actually redeem a human heart, because it's a miracle, is the supernatural power of Jesus Christ. And the only group of people on the planet who has the message of the good news about Jesus Christ is us. It's the church. And if the church loses its saltiness, we're worthless. We have to shine that light, and we have to give people hope again. And we have to show them that there's a way to live in this warlike, crazy, fearful, anxious world, that it has a deep, abiding peace which transcends all understanding and puts us in a position where we can love and make peace and build a society where everybody flourishes and does well, including our own families. The world literally needs us. They need us to make peace. Are we going to be there for them? Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would help us be a peacemaking people. Lord, I pray peace over every person in this room. Those who are worried or anxious or grieving. Those who are disappointed or fearful. Those who are bitter. I pray peace over them all and peace in them all. Lord, I pray that you'd help us be people who makes peace. Help us be a people who, in our families, in our churches, in our places of work, in our cities, and in this world, make a garden where things can flourish, where things can do well. Lord, thank you so much for giving us new life and making us Christians who have faith in you. Now help us to be like you were. A God who not only taught about peace, but made peace by going to the cross and showing us it was humility and sacrifice and love that changes the world, not dominance and hatred. And Lord, thank you so much for saving us when we were still sinners, when we were still far from you, and loving us in our deepest, darkest places and saving us. We thank you for our love for us and the peace you've brought us. We pray you increase